It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you tonight to the Ransom Center and of course to our program, our very exciting discussion of Gabriel García Márquez's work, In Agosto Nos Vemos, published in English as Until August. So, and by the way, my name is Erica Nunquinez. I'm the Associate Director of Exhibitions and Public Programs here at the Ransom Center. And with the Ransom Center, since acquiring García Márquez's archive in 2015, the center really has had the distinct privilege of caring for such a rich collection, which includes manuscript drafts of published and unpublished works, correspondence with Márquez and others, 43 photograph albums, 22 scrapbooks, research materials, notebooks, newspaper clippings, screenplays, and other types of ephemera, making it, of course, accessible to a global audience of researchers, students, and a broad public audience. García Márquez, of course, became a writer and a journalist in his early 20s, completing the astonishing 100 Years of Solitude in 1967, and again, the Chronicle of a Death Foretold in 1981, The Love in a Time of Cholera in 1985, and of course others, all which have endured as powerful works of fiction, making García Márquez one of the most distinguished writers, screenwriters, and public intellectuals of the 20th century. Tonight, we are delighted to be joined by Gonzalo García, García Márquez's son, Dr. Cristobal Pera, and Dr. Gabriel Pollitt, professor of Spanish here at UT, to discuss the writing, editing, and posthumous publication of Until August. Unfortunately, Rodrigo Garcia was supposed to be here tonight, but he is not feeling well, so we have to extend our appreciation and our gratitude to him from a distance, watching online. You are very much missed. So since its publication this past spring, Until August, has inspired much discussion among scholars, readers, and writers about the complex issues around the stewardship of García Márquez's legacy. Our speakers tonight, Cristobal Pera, is vice president and editor of Editorial Planeta USA and has a global publishing career encompassing Spain, Mexico, and the US. He holds a PhD in Latin American literature from UT, where he taught here on the culture of Latin America at graduate and undergraduate levels. He was also the editor of Gabriel García Márquez's last books, the novel Living to Tell the Tale, the collections I'm Not Here to Give a Speech, and of course, The Scandal of the Century. He's here again tonight to talk about his editorial work on Until August. We're also honored to have with us Dr. Gabriel Pollitt, who will be moderating the conversation. Gabriel is a professor at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese here at UT. Among her many fiction and nonfiction works, she explores the representation of narco-traffic and its personal, often devastating social impacts. She is also the author of many works of fiction, poetry, the novel Los Libros de Otros, published in 2022. And her latest book, Unwanted Witness, Journalists and Conflict in Contemporary Latin America, explores the work of 5 journalists, 3 from Mexico, 1 from Colombia, and 1 from Argentina. I know Gabriela to be an ardent supporter of the Ransom Center, who regularly brings her classes and her many students here to visit the Márquez archive, as do other faculty members here, to explore and study his creative process and legacy, and of course as a source of profound inspiration. And we look forward to continuing that conversation tonight. So please join me in welcoming Gabriela Pollitt, Cristobal Pera, and Gonzalo García.
Thank you for that generous presentation. Thank you to the Harry Ransom Center, Cristobal, Gonzalo, welcome. And thank you to all of us to be joining us tonight, that we have a very interesting and long waited conversation. I would like to ask you, Gonzalo, a very general question to land us in this dialogue. Although people know this, but it would be nice to hear from you, how is it that your father's papers arrived to the Harry Ransom Center?
Thank you very much. Good evening. They arrived when Gabo was still alive. I believe it was Rodrigo, my brother, who initiated the conversation. It definitely did not come from Gabo or Mercedes, who never really thought about these kinds of things, legacy, etc. These were not themes that they were concerned with. But definitely we were, Rodrigo and I were, and we started talking about this. We initially started looking for possible candidates to receive the collection, and I think that once the decision was taken, we did some touring. We spoke to different people. What we were mainly interested in was to deposit the papers in a place where they wouldn't be just laid down and archived and never to be seen again. And of course, there were several places that do this kind of thing, but we were soon directed to just a couple of institutions. Obviously, some in the East Coast of the United States, and then Texas, where we had very few references, but we spoke with them. Stephen Ennis, whom we're very grateful with, was in touch with us. They came to Mexico. They gave us all the guarantees, especially of this point, that this not be a sort of dead archive, which unfortunately is the case of most Latin American collections. They do keep the papers, but then it's difficult to have access to them.
Yeah.
I think that was the promise we got from the Ransom Center, and we're very happy to have taken that decision, because very soon most of the papers were online. We started getting feedback from people who came to the collection, who had access to the collection, who had access to until August, even though it hadn't been published. So I think we took the right direction and the right decision.
I agree with you. I fully agree with you. But it's also thanks to your generosity, the Harry Ransom was able to make the manuscripts public. They digitalized the manuscript, and they are available to every human being with access to internet. And that's because you lend those rights, right?
Yes, we really, at least I really didn't think very much about that until we started getting that feedback. And then through the years, as you know, it took us at least 10 years before we started thinking about publishing it. And it was when we started getting the feedback that we realized that people were actually paying attention about this book that Gabo hadn't published, that we had instructions not to publish. But I think that was a good start for the manuscript.
So of course there were critics when it was published, I just want to remember that García Márquez is not alone, mentioning some writers whose work was published posthumously: Nabokov, Kafka, Bolaño, Plath, Kennedy too, even Virgil had work was published posthumously, and some cases against their will. But I want to get a closer look. I want to go to the DNA of this. When Colonel Aureliano Buendía is about to be shot, he's in prison, and Ursula, his mother, comes to visit, and he asks her. He gives all the poems that he wrote to Remedios Moscote, and he says, you have to destroy them in the oven. And she didn't follow the instructions. And so I think this reminds us that sometimes life makes us realize that we decipher what has already been written, right? And you write with your brother that, Ursula then didn't destroy the papers, and Colonel Aureliano Buendía survives. He was poisoned by his enemies. He got enough poison to kill a horse, but under Ursula's care, he survives and wakes up and realizes that she didn't destroy the papers, and he asked why, and she said, I didn't want to be hasty. And so I think that we come to a circle, as usually with García Márquez stories. In this preface, you write that he said, the final sentence on the book was, this book doesn't work. It has to be destroyed. And you continue, we didn't destroy it, but we left it aside with the hope that time would decide what to do with it, just like Ursula. So the question is, because you're the sons who you didn't follow your father's instructions, summoned by the curiosity of the readers who have an intimate relationship with the author and who want to know, why didn't you throw it to the oven?
Wow, Gabriela, if I would have been aware and conscious of this quote of 100 years of solitude, I think everything would have been much easier for us. But I wasn't. I was not aware of it. And yes, I've been thinking about it, preparing for this conversation. And at least in my case, it was such a casual comment on the part of Gabo. He was already in an advanced state of he had his dementia had already set in. These were conversations that we had, and really there was not there was no theme that remained in time. I remember clearly him saying that, and then we just never ever talked about it anymore. Yeah. My brother and I were aware, and my mother, of course, we were aware of other works that had been indeed burned by Gabo. So this was another argument. If he didn't burn it, well, why were we? What right had we to burn it? Yeah. Maybe the more interesting question was why we didn't classify it, which was something that the Ransom Center does, and I believe they offered us. We can reserve this for 25 years. We can reserve this for 50 years, yes. And we never had that idea either. If it was going to be there, if there were people who were going to spend the time to come and have a look at it. I believe Patricia Lara, the Colombian journalist, was reading that the day after the papers were deposited. And I don't know if she wrote about that, Cristobal.
Yeah,
Did she
wrote
actually
about
write
it,
about that? So it's something that maybe we also owe to the Ransom the fact that
I agree.
they have been very open, and the 10 years of people coming and writing, and many times not even writing, but just telling us, hey, I read the book, and you know, and why is it going to be published? Why isn't it going to be published? I think that helped us. So I think the center was also instrumental in our final decisions.
Well, in the beautiful book your brother wrote as a farewell to your parents,
Indeed.
and I have it here, and it's dedicated to you, which
Yes.
is beautiful. He says that sometimes you were summoned to his study and helped him destroy materials when you were kids, and well, if he didn't call you to destroy this,
He did
you
not
know,
say
like,
that, yes. And when
that was a sign.
we already had that very perverse habit
Yeah.
of tearing up
Yeah.
the pages that he didn't want.
Yeah.
So we didn't haste to do that because we had already probably assimilated that part. And as I say, he said it casually. He never ever mentioned it again. So there was really no reason
To destroy
to
it.
destroy it. And then Mercedes was never adamant about following father's instructions to that point. She was absolutely, she agreed to have the papers come and not be classified. So you know, we believe that I definitely didn't feel I had the right to do that. I knew about Kafka, and I only recently know about Virgil, but I do now know about Virgil.
Well,
So
I did some research to prepare myself and sound, you know.
Yeah.
I have to be eloquent here. But I think that we're lucky. I think that we're very lucky. The character is García Márquez has many strong female characters, and you go from Ursula, you know, the matriarch. You have Pilar Ternera, who's somebody who enjoys life. You have Amaranta Ursula at the end, who's a very, you know, she enjoys life in a very modern way, let's say. But Anna Magdalena Bach has, she experiences the tedious life that a middle-aged woman, I mean, it's the first time the tedious life of a middle-aged person in a marriage is explored in literature a lot, abundantly, from the man's point of view. And, you know, that boredom doesn't mean that he's not in love, but, you know, that topic has been explored. And now we see a woman in the, you know, in Gabriel García's Márquez, giving her that possibility of exploring that life outside that boredom with the same easiness that a guy would have. And I think that as a character of the 21st century and in the current times, it was great to read a character like that. So I'm.
yes, I think you're completely right. I inevitably cannot separate Until August from one of his other latest books. I don't know if it was the book right before that, which is Memory of My Melancholy Horse, in which Gabo goes into the life of a very old man with fantasies about very young girls, and at the same time he was writing this other novel, which is a story, as you say, of a woman in middle age who wants her independence and who pursues her independence, and I find that very moving. I find that Gabo in his later years was in great haste to explore in the time that he had left, the very, as you say, very 21st century themes. I don't know how much he was aware at that time about how customs or literary trends were changing at that time, but he was definitely hip to what was going on in his later years. Of course, he was always very much in touch with people, with younger people. That was something that I think is important to know about my parents. They were always very much in touch with people of other generations, with younger couples, with people who were living the 21st century and who were living their midlife crises, which especially my mother was a great counselor for the younger generations with that. People would travel many hours to listen to my mother give them advice, because ay mijito, she would say, or mijita, and then she'd go on and give them the lecture. So I think both of them were quite aware of what was going on, and yes, and I think it shows how much they were interested. And and Gabo, he just loved people. He was, and he was, I think above all, he was a great listener. It was probably part of his journalistic formation. But when people were together in a reunion with him, he wouldn't be the one carrying the conversation. He'd basically be listening.
Yeah, I think that is a writer's.
I think so.
I want to go to the novel, to the different versions of the novel, because since we talk about how they survived, they weren't taken to the oven, that must have been for you, Cristobal, a great roadmap to put together the final version of this manuscript. So do you want to talk about us? You say something in your editor's note at the end that I am curious about. You talk about the editor's block. And so I would like you to tell us how was it, the process, but also to talk a little bit, what was the editor's block in this particular book? Because I know that it was such a great responsibility, so it will be great to know that. I think that people are curious. I am.
Yeah. Well, thank you first of all to everybody, to Ransom Center, and as Gonzalo has already mentioned, I think that that generosity on their part and on Harry Ransom Center part has given us this novel, the possibility of reading this final novel. But you mentioned responsibility. Yeah, that was a main thing that I felt like a weight on my shoulders. Another word that I would mention is respect, that it was always in my head when Gonzalo and Rodrigo called me one day, in August, by the way, it was, and to tell me that if the book was going to be published, they wanted me to edit it. And yeah, that was, but at the same time, I knew that I couldn't do this job as an academic job. I couldn't do an edition, a noted edition, as something that you mentioned a long time ago. You said, well, maybe one day they can be done and edited and
annotated.
Annotated
Yes.
edition of this. So going back to the beginning, I had been in touch with the novel and with the idea of publishing the novel long before, because as I mentioned in the editor's note, García Márquez's agent, Carmen Balcells, mentioned to me the novel. He has this novel that he hasn't found the ending. Why don't you encourage him to do it? I mean, she knew that I was at the time working with him regularly in another book, and so that's where the story begins. Before Gonzalo and Rodrigo made that call, and I, of course, when I returned to Mexico, I told him, "Oh, Carmen told me about this novel that." And that you don't have an ending, that maybe, he said, no, yes, I have an ending. And he took the manuscript, and he read me the last paragraph, and I said, wow, yes, a beautiful, very impressive ending. And he said, well, Carmen tells me that it's about a woman who travels to an island to visit her mother's tomb, and that she falls in love with a man, and she returns to the island 4 or 5 times. Every chapter is a visit to visit that man. And he said, no, it's not just one man. It's one every time, that a different man every time. So that was a great teaser for me. I mean, I thought this sounds like an amazing story. But he wouldn't let me read it until, I thought maybe it was a year later. I was insisting again, and he told me, okay, let's read it together. And he allowed me to read aloud 3 chapters out of the 6 chapters. So again, it was like a cliffhanger. He kept me in the cliffhanger too, so at that moment, he and Gonzalo and Rodrigo had mentioned that also, and he didn't have the possibility of working on the novel as a whole, but he could work at a granular level, changing an adjective or a noun or scratching a sentence. It is amazing because at that time his memory was not working well. He was even reading his own works, sometimes to recognize what he had written. And so we left it there. I mean, I until that moment, and then that's when the Ransom Center comes into place, and it was the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was ready to travel and spend here whatever time, 2 or 3 weeks, but it was not possible. So I got in touch with Stephen Ennis through Rodrigo and Gonzalo, and then with Jim Kuhn and the team, and they did an amazing job digitizing everything because they hadn't yet digitized that book, And they sent to me, and that's when I began working. Someone that I need to mention, and it's very important, is García Márquez's secretary, Mónica Alonso. Mónica Alonso is key in all this process because she was working with him since 2003, I think, and she kept the care. She was in charge of taking care of all the versions. And she kept also a Word document that was key for me in the edition. I worked from that Word document that had traces of older plots that were disappearing sometimes, but they were still there. And I could easily compare it with the last version that he wrote. And we can see now the next... we should go to let me go here first. Sorry, this is, yes, this version, sorry, I did something very wrong. But I'm sure Doug is going to help me. Yes, thank you, Doug. Oh, okay. So, well, you can see in this first page that is even torn. Again, we have to go back here. It says Julio 2004, gran OK, final big, final OK. He's even writing in is it the best one? This is the best one? Is this the best one? He's even wondering himself. No. So that is the version that when I was even in Mexico with Monica and looking at the manuscript, she said this is the last one that he considers the best, but he still works in other versions because he doesn't know which one he's taking, and sometimes. And I said, well, this is very important. Please, anything that he changes in the other manuscript, you should try to put it back here in that last version and consolidate it here. No? And so she did that, and she worked also in the Word. And that is the first thing I did. Read carefully the last version. I went back to the earlier versions to see. But I couldn't trust earlier versions, and we are going to see an example of that because, and this is something that I think nobody has seen yet. I mean, not many people. This is one of the earliest versions, versión en computadora de Los Ángeles. And Monica mentioned that to me. This is the one version that he brought in 2003 when he was in Los Angeles. We talked about that yesterday.
Yes.
And that's why there is no number, version number, she says. And here, in the fifth page, in the back of one of the pages, he's writing something that is very, very telling about the process of writing novel. He says, esa noche en el hotel, y con él se quedará por siempre. Es con él con quien con él se acuesta.
El único.
El único. That night at the hotel, and then with him, she will be forever. This is with the guy that she goes to bed with, the only one. Había encontrado al hombre de su vida y se enamoró del hombre de su vida. She had found the man of his life and she fell in love with him. Por eso vuelve. That's why she returns. So this is something, just an example of many things that you see in the earlier versions until the fourth, the fifth version. In this one, at the beginning, he might have even considered in the earlier ideas to have a woman who travels to the island, meets a man, falls in love with him. They have a night of passion. She falls in love with him, and she returns to him. That changed completely.
It was not a rom-com.
Exactly. It was not a rom-com. So things like this, you find them often in the earlier version, but I didn't work with those versions. I couldn't work. I was not going to do an archaeological edition. That was not. I wanted to present to the readers the last version with the least intervention possible. Least intervention meaning that I never added a word. I never added a paragraph to fill a void. I mean, that is a given, but I mean, you have to repeat it so people understand that. And that's why we can talk a little more about the work that I did. This is another 2 pages of this early manuscript, the Los Angeles manuscript. And this is only an example. I mean, there is not even a title in the chapter. There are some instructions for himself where she sees the man of the $20 passing by. And I know, if you read the novel, you know what it means. And then, in here, you, I mean, I think Doug told me how to use the pointer. Yeah, here, you see the traces of his own narrative instructions to continue the story. He's not doing literature here. He's just giving himself a reminder to continue the action. But he's saying, al llegar al cementerio encuentra flores podridas en la tumba de su madre. This is not writing, this is, I don't know, how would you say?
Kind of a synopsis.
Synopsis of what is to come. And this is amazing to be able to see this. I mean, the carpentry of the writer. That was not my job. Someday, someone might do an edition and do that. So that was the manuscript that I had with all his marks on the margin, as you can see here. And I had mainly two or three objectives. One was to decide about the options that he himself he was marking on the side, but he never put together in a final manuscript. So I had to act like an editor, like if I had been with him there and make that call, but always following what it was in the page. I never second guess him. So in here, this is interesting because this has to do with another. For instance, here you have an example of this sopor. Planeo inmediatamente en el vapor del ardiente de la laguna, and he put sopor, and probably I changed to sopor. I would have to see that, but I mainly followed his instructions. But here you see something that is very interesting. He's describing and presenting the main character, Ana Magdalena Bach. And she arrives to the hotel. She's looking at herself in the mirror, and a middle-aged woman, as you mentioned.
I thought that you were saying as you.
No, as you mentioned. No, please. And but there is another trace of the first ideas that because the first idea was that the protagonist would be not older woman, but close to what we call in Spanish tercera edad, no? So he literally wrote that en las vísperas de la tercera edad, close to the third age, close to an old age.
Senior citizen.
You could say, 58, 59, 60, something like that. But when I did the timeline, I studied the ages of the characters. She was clearly a woman of 46 years old. Yes, she finishes the novel when she's 50. And he has even a table in the back of a page working with the ages of the characters. So that sentence had to go. And it was not even a decision very difficult to make, because he even realized that and made that mark. So he was leaving the hints for the, in this case, for the editor to do it. Yeah. And so that's another of the things that I can explain that I did in the novel. Another example, I don't know if it's here. Yes, I think it's here. Yes. In this same first chapter, there is the scene, the first scene when he meets this elegant man in the hotel the first night after she visited her mom's tomb, and that's when that's the inciting incident, as we would say in the movie, when he approaches her to invite her a drink, and she decides out of the blue, I'm going to have a night of passion with this man. And he describes this man as un hombre distinto que no había visto entrar. Vestía de lino blanco con el cabello metálico, el bigote romántico terminado en puntas. The romantic mustache pointed. Well, there is a scene, a very important scene that closes the circles. Many of the circles that he closes in this short novel, when in the 6th chapter, in chapter 6, Maria Magdalena, Anna Magdalena Bach she thinks that she has recognized this man in the city inland where she lives, and but she's not sure. And then she tells next time she sees him, she realizes, yes, it's him. It's the man I had the first night with, and that she felt insulted because he left the $20 bill inside the Dracula book. And she says she didn't recognize him because he had a mustache now in the 6th chapter. So if he had a mustache in the 6th chapter and she didn't recognize him because of that, he couldn't have a mustache here. And it is very simple. I mean, it is a narrative, something that it was narrative logic.
Yeah.
You know, that he would have said, yes, of course, let's take this out. So these are part of the editorial decisions that I had to make. Everything was recorded and noted in a Word document with track changes, saying exactly what changed and when, the decision to make, so to leave a record. Maybe that can come to the Ransom Center someday. I mean, when you are the ones to decide. But I wanted to show you this to just share an example of the work I did. Okay.
Wonderful show. This was wonderful, and I think that just to this kind of mistake, let's say, it's a common mistake. It's not. I mean, every writer goes and it's nothing.
This is what a writer in a second and third revision would have done easily.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have an editor. He didn't have. He never had an editor in the sense of someone who would modify his text. Is that right?
Well, no.
No.
The nearest thing there was you. In his later years, he did rely on a couple of people who would read. Maybe Álvaro Mutis, who was his longtime friend
and the
and
copywriter
crony.
Antonio Bolivar, that was more
Yes.
most a
But
copywriter.
Antonio was also part of his later life,
Yes,
kind of editing.
Yeah, but you're right. Maybe Mutis was. He served like an editor for him.
Well, Mutis was definitely one of his ears. Álvaro was there from very, very soon because they met probably at 20 or 21, and Álvaro probably heard or read every manuscript that there was there. But he was not there really as an editor. He was just there as a crony, I think, more than anything.
Yeah.
Just one question before we open the floor for it. Was the editor block different in this book from other books that you have edited?
The editor's block that you mentioned is very. It was the weight of responsibility. It is, I mean, thinking that how all these things that I'm explaining that seem very clear. But I was working with a text by García Márquez, and I was thinking, can I do this? I mean, knowing that I was never crossing any line of adding anything, but I had to review the ages of the characters, the names, inconsistencies, but there are still traces, as you and Rodrigo mentioned there are still traces there of these inconsistencies, and these, we have seen today some levels of how, but for instance, there are stories that disappeared completely, like the story of the cemetery being completely destroyed because there was going to be a cemetery for the rich people in the island, and that disappeared. But there are still traces there that I didn't touch, and people maybe don't notice, but they are there.
You mentioned in your editor's book that you work in front of a masterpiece as a restaurateur, and I thought that was a beautiful image, because it's actually...
Well, I think it wasn't a brother of mine that gave me that idea, because a restaurateur doesn't change a painting, just cleans and clear and maybe retouches something so it is more, but I thought it was a good...
beautiful image, because there's still decision of how the color goes. Anyways, I want to open the floor to questions.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes.
I have a question for Gonzalo. I'm curious to know the arc of your attitude about this book. When did you first become aware of the existence of this manuscript? What was your initial sort of feeling about it? And how did that evolve over time before you wound up where you are today?
Well, I first heard of it from my dad. He was writing it, and I clearly remember being in the studio and him showing me the manuscript. Before there was a question of not publishing it or publishing it, it was just something that he was writing, as I said before, along with a couple of other works that eventually came out, probably Love and Other Demons and My Melancholy Whores. I have the impression, Cristobal, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that he actually started out writing these three books more or less at the same time.
And it was a plan. There was a plan to write about love in elder age.
Right.
And that's why probably the original character, Ana Magdalena Bach, was going to be older.
Yes, and now that you mention it, Cristobal, this theme of elderly people's relationships goes all the way back to love in the time of cholera. So, I wasn't living in Mexico City at that time. He was always traveling and writing at the places where he stayed. So I was first aware of it when he told me he was writing it, and he probably showed me the manuscript. But I never really got to read the manuscript until just before he said it had to be destroyed. I read it without this awareness that I was about, that I had to decide at some point whether, and I could see it was a work in progress. I had not made a reality check thinking that my father would not be able to finish any of his works. That's something children deny from their parents, thinking that they're immortal. And this moment in which he said this has to be destroyed just came and went by so fast that it didn't seem to me like a definitive moment of any sort. It became more of a reality when the papers came here, when some people, private people and journalists, started to question whether, why the book was not being published, and that's when my brother and I, and this is 10 years after they arrived at the Harry Ransom. That's when Rodrigo and I decided, well, let's take a look at it, that fateful August that Cristobal is talking about. And frankly, when we read it, we did see that it needed work, but at least I was quite convinced that there was a whole book there. It needed organization and work and someone to go through all of the manuscripts that are here at the Ransom. But I was definitely convinced that between not publishing it and publishing it, as a publisher, one has that impulse. It has to come out. If it hadn't come out, we wouldn't be here. There wouldn't be a book. Gabos's work would not. Gabos's complete works would not be available to the public. For me, as a son and as a publisher, I really never doubted. And if we wouldn't have taken that decision, exactly 75 years after his death, somebody would have had the initiative to do it. And then Rodrigo and I would not have had at least the strings to do it our way.
Yeah.
So it was also a very selfish decision.
Why do you think, can I ask you, Paul, why do you think your dad didn't destroy the manuscripts when he had the chance?
Well, frankly, because, as I said before, he did destroy a lot of stuff. So I think that he forgot after saying that has to be destroyed.
Or maybe secretly he didn't want
Yes,
to
or
bother with.
But frankly, remembering what he was, he just didn't talk about it anymore. And right after that, I believe Monica stopped pushing him to finish the book.
Yeah.
There was also this unconscious initiative on behalf of definitely Monica, whose job it was, and the family to keep him working.
Yeah.
We'd push him to go to the studio. We'd encourage him to work on the books, and frankly, when he said this book doesn't work, it has to be destroyed, well, we stopped doing that.
He gave me another reason once. No, it was not this one. He told me when I also kind of pushed him a little bit. Why don't you? He said, well, at this point of my life, I don't need to publish anything else.
Right.
And he was so right.
He was busy writing. He was busy reading his books and discovering them and saying, "Oh, wow, this is a good book."
Yes. Este
That's
man
what your
es.
brother tells here.
Yes, he
it's
in fact
amazing.
read 100 Years of Solitude and said, "Wow, this seems to
man.
be written under the influence of drugs."
Yeah.
What a great story.
It's true.
It's incredible.
Yes?
Thank you so much for being here. I have two questions actually. So my question for Cristobal is, as an editor, are there any strategic differences in how you approach early career writers versus someone like García Márquez?
Which one?
So as an editor,
Yes,
when
yes.
you're working with someone who's early in their career, like a first-time writer,
Oh, yeah.
versus someone
Oh,
like
yeah,
García
of course.
Márquez Like, how do you approach
No,
the
of course. I mean, again, responsibility, respect, utmost respect. I knew that was the privilege that they put in my hands was the job of my life. I mean, what can you do more than editing a work by García Márquez? But you have to do it with utmost respect. And this is different from editing a young writer. Maybe respect is always there, has to be the trust with the, but then of course you can intervene more or try to intervene. And I will tell you something that happened. The first time I worked with García Márquez was probably in 2000, when Carmen Balcells called me in Barcelona. I was in Barcelona in a summer. It was August again. It's amazing. Yes, it was August. And that's why Carmen, couldn't find the usual editor of García Márquez, my dear friend, who is not with us anymore, Claudio López de la Madrid, who I'm in publishing because of him also. And Carmen said, you have to come because I have him on the phone, and he needs an editor. It was like an emergency call, you know.
The call of your life.
The call of my life, exactly. And I was on the road, and I turned the car back. I was going to pick up my wife, and I told her, you have to return by train because García Márquez is on the phone. And so I was going to say that I work with, the first thing he told me is that he needed someone in the publishing company to read the manuscript. It was a nonfiction book, it was memoirs, it was different, and to fact check and to make anything, to tell him anything that should be corrected or, and I became kind of a fact checker, and he was very happy, and I write this when I mentioned, among other things, there were small things, that when he said that when he read The Metamorphosis by Kafka, it changed his whole conception of the narrative, you know, and he, that with Rulfo, of course, gave way to 100 Years of Solitude. But he said that he read The Metamorphosis in a translation by Jorge Luis Borges. And I had been working in an edition about Borges and read an interview with him where he mentioned that he never translated Kafka, but the editor, again, a bad editor, put his name in the cover to make more sales, translated by Borges. He had translated a small story, The Rural Doctor. So he was so happy, García Márquez was so happy that, because he was a journalist also, and that was a nonfiction book, he wanted to be very precise. And, but at the same time, I tell you, once I tried to tell him about a sentence that for me was a little confusing. He said, don't touch it. That's how it is. So that's my answer.
I'm going to take one more question. Yeah.
This is for Cristobal also. Two-part. One, what was it like to edit without him in the room after so many years of, I imagine, dialogue and discussion?
Yeah.
And so then that's the second question. As you dialogued with him, not in the room, were there recurring discussions, arguments that you had with him as you cleaned up the story?
Well, I never talked with him about this story. I told in general terms about how I liked the argument when I read together with him the chapters, but we never got into detail. In that sense, and Gonzalo knows, he was very secretive about what he was writing at the time. And but yes, doing the job of working on the edition without him, I mean, I didn't even think about it because it was a matter-of-fact thing that, and that's when, again, the respect came. I mean, in the editor's blog that I was mentioning, the fact that every decision had to be the right one. I was not playing with a text or a novel that had arrived to my hands. So, but I write also here that I felt his presence. I have to say that. I felt his presence with me. I'm not talking about something, but yeah, and his presence comes from his books, from his having read all his books, I began reading his books, I mean, in Spain when I was 14, and they brought me here to Austin 35 years ago to study Latin American literature. So that presence comes from his body of works, not something preternatural or something, and that is, and my conversations with him that were about other writers, about mostly about literature. He would call me, with Monica, he would mention me as el librero, because we would talk about books, el librero, porque hablamos de libros, ¿no? So that was Cortázar, for example, would talk about Cortázar, and he would have tears in his eyes, remembering Cortázar, how much he loved him. Yeah, that's it.
Well, we come to the full circle. As Cristobal just said, he graduated from here, and García Márquez brought him here. So we close this conversation. It was a pleasure for me to be with you. It was an honor.
Great pleasure for us, too. Thank you very much, Gabriela.
And we thank the Harry Ransom, and especially you, because without you, then we will be talking in a small room.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.